President Trump making stops this week in Arizona and Wisconsin as new polls suggest he's falling behind in those states as well as other key battlegrounds. A brand new Fox News poll shows the president trailing Democratic nominee Joe Biden by 9 points in Florida, with the two candidates essentially tied in North Carolina, Georgia, and even Texas. Let's bring in Wall Street Journal columnist and Fox News contributor Karl Rove. He served as a senior advisor to President George W. Bush. So, Karl, this seems to have really the race changed abruptly in the last month. What's your analysis of why?
Well, I think it's changed in about the last 6 to 7 weeks because people, I think, looked at the president's handling of the coronavirus. And think about this. We have a huge gap in the president's approval rating on coronavirus between him, for example, and a governor like Cuomo, who admittedly, and at the onset of the virus, said, let's take COVID-19 patients and put them in nursing homes where there are available hospital beds. And yet, Cuomo's got high ratings, the president's got low ratings. And I think it has to do with how the president came across. Not exactly what he did, but how he came across, and that he lacked empathy. And then you put on top of that George Floyd and the aftermath of that. There's clear majority in America. I put it in one of my columns. 73% in a Reuters poll said they believed that the protests over George Floyd's death were justified. And 79% said that while they agreed the protests were justified, they did not think any violence and looting connected with them was justified. And the president's got to strike both notes, and he's been striking the latter note, the law and order note, almost to the exclusion of the empathetic note, even though he has had a good speech in Florida that nobody saw on the day of the SpaceX launching. And, for example, the day that he issued his executive order, he had a meeting with the families of police victims who came out and sung his praises about how empathetic he'd been.
Karl, do you think that the president and his advisors understand the amount of trouble that he's in? What they say is, well, look, we were trailing Hillary Clinton by this much in 2016. He wasn't the incumbent. He was the challenger. Right. People are making up their minds about him and his judgment right now. Do they understand how much trouble he's in?
I think so, but we won't know until they change what they're doing. I thought the editorial on Friday's Wall Street Journal about having to have a second-term agenda was absolutely critical. What do they have to do in order to win? They face the same challenge that President Obama faced, that President Bush 43 faced, that President Clinton faced, that President Bush 41 faced. And that is, first of all, what is it that they want to do in the next 4 years? Nobody gets reelected president by saying, I did a good job, reward me. You have to have a vision for the second agenda, for the second term. And that's the first and foremost thing that they need to pay attention to. In addition, what are the big choices? They need to make this about contrast. What are the things that they want to do that they can then contrast with what Joe Biden would do, or vice versa?
Right.
Joe Biden says he wants to do this, I want to do that. The least important, and there's a role for it, but the least important is Biden's weaknesses. They do need to attack Biden's weaknesses, but the first two things are far more important than this, and some of the most important Biden weaknesses are going to appear on their own. With all due respect to the former vice president, he cannot put two coherent sentences together. And we saw this past week where he said we're suffering, 120 million deaths from coronavirus.
But Karl, look, I mean, if you're Joe Biden and your opponent is out there every day and people are saying, I don't like what he's selling, or I don't like the messenger, why would you get out of the bunker? Stay in the bunker. Well, don't answer any questions.
Well, first of all, he's going to have to be more visible. Otherwise, people are going to start talking. And second of all, the debates. He cannot avoid the debates. And if he goes into the debates in the same way that he is today, I mean, just watch. You can go on YouTube and see these interviews that he's doing with local TV stations, and they're terrible. But he will have, in September and October, August, September, and October, after the Democratic convention in Milwaukee, we will see and hear more of him, and we'll certainly see and hear a lot more of him in the debates. And he better get better or he's going to have difficulty. But again, the point is, that's the least important of the three things that the Trump campaign needs to worry about. Getting a vision is number two, and defining the contrast in their terms is number two. And down there, the Biden weaknesses is a distant third.
But here's I think the core question for people who want to vote for the president and are looking for an agenda. I'm not sure the presidency is capable of making this about something other than himself. He puts himself in the center of everything. The pandemic, for example, it's all about him and how people treat him. The Floyd issue, he keeps coming back to how people perceive him. Voters don't, frankly, I mean, what they want is, what are you going to do about us? What are you going to do for the country? But is the president capable of making that case?
Well, I think he is, because he did so in 2016. But we'll see. And remember, in 2016, all he had to do was make it for like the last 6 or 7 weeks of the election,
right.
And he was running against a very unpopular figure. He will be running against an affable, not so threatening figure in the form of Joe Biden. So he's got to begin doing it now, and certainly no later than the Republican convention. He better have a convention speech that does the things that the Wall Street Journal editorial called for on Friday, or he's going to be in grave difficulty as Labor Day opens up the fall campaign.
All right, Karl Rove, thanks so much for coming in.